All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to WatchThis with Rick Ramos. As always, this is your host, Rick Ramos, my partner, Mr. Ibrahim Chavez, coming to you. And we are continuing our dissection, our discussion of Harrison Ford's, Steven Spielberg, and George Lucas's 1980s creation that is just continuing to roll through cinemas, Indiana Jones. And last week we talked about Raiders of the Lost Ark, the introduction of this character. The week before that we talked about the introduction of this series. We talked about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. We both had a really good time with that film. Said a lot of good things about Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's definitely a film series that has stuck with me a little bit more profoundly than with Mr. Chavez, but both of us having enjoyed enjoyed both of those films. Now I guess we get into the meat of the series with Dial of Destiny and Raiders bookending. We look at Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I gotta say it's very strange because as I watched all five films over this past two weeks or so, and Crystal Skull, Last Crusade, and Temple of Doom in the last week. It the films resonated with me differently than when I first watched them some 20 and almost 30 years ago, probably, as well as the last time that I viewed them when I introduced the series to my nephew. This was a different take on it. And I guess when you see the entire span of a story, it's impossible to not watch it with that understanding of how things are going to play out. It's you can only experience something for the first time once, but every experience afterwards is telling in its own right. You see things differently. You look at events and they play out in a different manner. I gotta say that where I thought Temple of Doom wasn't all that great a film, it is elevated in my opinion now. Last Crusade, a lot of fun. The introduction of Sean Connery as Henry Jones Sr. But most surprisingly was Crystal Skull was not, I don't want to say not as bad a film as I thought it was, but I was surprised at actually how good it was, despite some very pronounced problems with CGI and some of the character work in it, as well as the direction by Spielberg. But we're going to get into that. So, that being said, Raiders to Temple of Doom. Well, what's your opinion? After we have gotten through Dial of Destiny, Raiders, here we have three films that are coming together for this episode. What was your take on not the films themselves, but the film watching experience? What did you feel? Did you watch these by yourself? Did you watch them with
I
Leslie?
watched it with Leslie.
You
Yeah.
watched them? Was it her? It wasn't her first time seeing them, though, right?
No,
No.
no.
Okay. So what was your take on them? What did you? How
Well,
first of all,
first,
how long had it been since you'd seen them?
it had been a long time since I had seen him.
Okay.
Long.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Raiders is the one that I've seen the most. That every once in a while, like I won't even say that. Oh, like every fucking blue moon,
Yeah.
like I'll see it. Or it would be at some kind of festival or some kind of outdoor bullshit that like when I used to go to those things like more frequently, like it would be one of the features or whatever.
Yeah.
The other ones I haven't seen in years, and I wish I would have had the drugs that you took um, in order for you to say that fucking they got better.
No, no, no. I didn't
Uh,
say they got better. Oh no. Oh. Better in my memory. Yeah. Yeah. I got you.
or maybe I missed the shock of whatever it is that you said like fucked me up. But uh, whatever it is that like gave you the impression of the outlook that that I just got from you. Like I wish I would have had that because um,
So you hated all
they
three
just don't.
films? Did
I
you not
didn't
have a
hate
good
them.
time? Hmm.
We did have a good time. Kind of like understanding that that they're comedies.
Yeah.
Um, and having to like tell myself that these are comedies though.
Yeah.
These are comedies. These are comedies. But also like I got the overwhelming sense that the series just became not. I don't know if it became that or if it was always. I think it was always headed there. Um, that it became what the History Channel became, um,
Yeah.
which was you start off in World War II and then you end up with ancient aliens. Like
Yeah.
that's basically what it literally fucking became.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Maybe they were using it as a
And
template. I don't know.
I mean, there are issues I have with that in terms of just kind of um, what we talked about with Dune,
Yeah.
in terms of like the White Saviour
Hmm.
um, and all that. And then there's also just the element of thinking to myself, you know, is it that just the most important thing about the films culturally is that Harrison Ford became iconic as a character, and he's part of movie history, and it just happened, and um, and so now we look back because we're used to those images, and we place maybe greater importance on it than it either deserves or that it actually somehow has, just because we recognize it and there's a nostalgia factor and it
Hmm.
is iconic. Um, but is it just one of those things that fucking happened? Um, I don't know. I kind of get the sense that I kind of that's kind of my opinion at this point because I don't think they're these great films, um, and I'm really wanting to look at more of Spielberg again,
Hmm.
um, and it's making me question. I don't know, like what people's opinions are about Spielberg in general, but also to look back at like what is his place in his generation of filmmakers, and how important is he? Is his importance overstated? Obviously, as a blockbuster director, that's what he is. But is that all he is? You know what I mean? Like, it's really making me ask these other questions. Whereas I think on some level before, maybe for whatever reason, I just took it for granted that, he is definitely part of this pantheon of directors from the 70s, um, of those film brats or whatever they're called. But I'm just looking at it, or these questions that I may have already kind of had before in terms of, this guy, as we've said, he's a Boy Scout, he's whatever. The questions are now renewed
Hmm.
because after watching these, I'm not that taken by his work, you know.
I can see what you're saying with that. I I understand it, but I disagree with it to a degree because these films do affect me in a certain way, and I don't place. It's very strange. The action in the film is compel. The action scenes in the film are compelling. They really grab a hold of you. They're beautifully done. They're incredibly well imagined, and
They are.
they're ridiculous in a lot of sense. I mean, this character does some shit that you just have to take a step back and say, you know what, I'm just enjoying it. But while it does that, it also oversteps certain things, especially in Crystal Skull, where it just goes too far. It gets too ridiculous. And we'll get into that, but I think what it is that yes, Spielberg is a Boy Scout. Spielberg does not have a lot of I don't know. There's not a lot of fight in him. There's not a lot of gravitas. So you don't get the feeling that the stakes are as high in his in these films, in these adventure films of his, these action adventure films. It's the excitement of the moment with this heaviness of world domination and the unknown. But it doesn't have if you were going to say show me an action film that is an actual masterpiece, I would go immediately to Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai. That's an action film. It's exciting. It's powerful. Great performances.
Would you even consider that an action film,
Yeah.
or is it just a drama that's a war drama?
No, I think it's an action film. I think it's an action film.
Okay,
There's a lot going
because
on there. There's a lot of the tropes of an action film. There is drama there. What Kurosawa was saying, I want to make a very exciting film, a film that is different from. You got to remember, Seven Samurai came out shortly after the American occupation of Japan during after World War II, and it was one of the first because for a long time, Japan samurai films, chambara films, were outlawed in Japan because of the American occupation. It was as if the United States wanted to dictate Japan's history and attitude after the war, wanted to control that sense of Japanese history and identity. So this was the first chance to come back and do something that was very exciting, very powerful, and noble in a lot of respects. But it's a very human film. It is about real issues, and it's about the struggle of surviving on a day to day basis. Raiders, Kingdom Skull, Dial, all of these other films are more one man's dive into the unknown. The idea of us as a species, what we are, where we come from, and yet so many different aspects of it that are the old saying of, you get one answer and you ask three more questions, that kind of thing. Where that's what a great deal of the Raiders films are. The Indiana Jones, as an archaeologist, whatever we discover about ourselves just leads to more questions. So it's a
right,
never ending
there's
cycle
always more
of.
buried there.
Yeah. So I like that about the films. I think they're masterpieces of action, but I don't think they're on the same level as a Kurosawa. I don't think they're on the same level of. It's very difficult to look at an action film and give it the label of a masterpiece because there's a prejudice involved in keeping action films to a child mentality. A lot of these things are geared towards the giddiness of childhood and that that playfulness and imagination that we all have and hopefully don't outgrow. At 48, I still see myself doing some of the stupid shit that happens in these movies for fun. I like the idea of being able to, you know, jump that pit when you've been left, when you've been left in a cave, and in Raiders where Alfred Molina walks away with the whip and adios, senor, and Indiana has to jump and catch it and pull himself, and then being chased by a giant boulder.
Yeah,
There's all kinds of. It's something that appeals to the child in all of us, whether we're watching John Wayne or Clint Eastwood or any number of the action films that we have grown up with. Action films, I don't know, action films don't get the respect that they deserve, but they don't have the gravity of human storytelling. Maybe it's because things are so exaggerated and so ridiculous that if you're going to call, you would call Scorsese's Raging Bull a masterpiece. You would call Taxi Driver a masterpiece because they're depictions of real world problems and real world human character study problems. Whereas this is the imagination gone wild, the excitement of who we wish we could be. If you watch Indiana Jones, if you watch these films and you don't want to be Jones, then you're missing out on a fundamental part of the experience.
Also, I mean that at that point, it's like if you want to be anybody and you don't want to be Indiana Jones, who the fuck do you want to be, and what does that say about you?
Yeah, I guess you're right. You're right there. I mean, as ridiculous as it is, I I like the sense of adventure in these films. I like the sense of imagining. We do this. You imagine,
Of course, yeah.
yeah, you imagine being somewhere and you see some big bastard coming at you and you're like, how many punches of his could I take before I ultimately rise above this? In your head, you think, yeah, I can do this. All reality says, no, you're going to get killed. But watching Indiana Jones get his ass beat over and over and over again, and I've said this in the last podcast and the podcast before that, no one gets beat better than Harrison Ford on camera. In this role, he takes insane amounts of beatings. And it's the will, it's the nerve to continue moving forward, because that's who the character is that he won't quit. He cannot quit.
Yeah.
I love that.
I mean, everyone wants to be, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people want that idea. There's a romanticism to being Samuel L. Jackson's character in Sitting at a Diner with John Travolta's character, where he's just like, I just want to go on adventures, you know?
Yeah.
And
like Haney Kung Fu. Yeah.
and just, yeah, and be a bum, as Travolta would say. But you just want to go to faraway places. You want to be, you want to get the girl. You want to get wealth, treasures, whatever. It all represents like an interesting life. It represents however that is. In our culture, that means sex, money, power, wealth, knowledge, whatever. To be found interesting by others, and to live an interesting life, and to live to tell about it.
Yeah.
There's a romance to that. I agree. I think there is something fun about it. I just think that I mean, look, I still I like the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland.
Yeah.
I like the production value. It's to me, it's kind of a metaphor for the films. It's kind of like, yeah, it has good production value. It makes you think of the ones that came before it. You go along for this ride, and then you leave. And I think that's kind of how I view the films. Is like Steven Spielberg is a car chase director, and that's not all he is. I'm shitting on him a little bit, but
It's all right.
one of us has to.
For all of his
Um,
billions of dollars, he deserves to get shit on every once in a while. I mean, I'm not gonna, you know.
Look, and like Jurassic Park, I really like Jurassic
Yeah,
Park, and it's I also think that Jurassic Park has better source material that deals with and we'll get into that eventually whenever we get into it. But
yeah,
even though that's like a popular novel or a genre novel, the same as like Jaws, I think the source material is actually better,
hmm,
um, and I think it deals with things that are deeper and touch more on the human condition. Although this does too, because it's like, well, not only about trying to control oneself or trying to gain access and knowledge to these things that are hidden and old and buried and literally, but also the power behind them, right?
yeah.
Like as you said, for world domination. But going back to the ride, it's there's it's easy to see them after a certain while as being more superficial of his in terms of his work. Either it's very sentimental.
You mean the films in the series?
Uh, I mean, in terms of Spielberg's work in general, either it's very sentimental, um, or it's chases and very action
Hmm.
and like, and even the most so-called, even the deepest of his work, I think sometimes is very like a Schindler's List is very obvious. Um,
Yeah. Well, Saving Private
but when,
Ryan, Schindler's. He wants to tie things up. He wants you to walk away from it with a sense of happiness. He doesn't. I think Spielberg is afraid of disappointment of disappointment with life, not disappointment in a film, nonetheless, but
Mhm.
not a disappointment with the film specifically, but with the idea of sending people out of a theater feeling as though there's a hopelessness in the world. That's something that you see in Bergman or um, Kubrick, definitely in Scorsese. You see it in filmmakers who are willing to take a darker and more pessimistic and a more real, I would argue, a more realistic view of humanity. Um, Spielberg is the Boy Scout who believes in the American dream, who believes in the light at the end of the tunnel and how things work out. And it'd be really interesting. I wish I had seen Meet the Fablemans before we started talking about this because, as I understand it, based on the Spielberg documentary that aired on HBO last year or the year before that, he comes from a not an extensively fucked up home, but definitely a home where the mother and father had their problems. The mother being a little bit crazy, and the father in somewhat of a level of denial in trying to maintain order, not order, but the 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 the
Normalcy.
glue of that family of trying to keep things together.
Yeah.
Spielberg's anger towards his father, his resentment of his father, and then his later coming to terms with understanding that his father was not entirely to blame, and some of that needed to be put on his mother. But there's also a very human understanding from based on that, and what I want to see in the Fablemans is a more a more comprehensive understanding of who we are as people. I think by the time you get to it's very interesting with you go from Last Crusade to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The reconnection with him and his father, which I think it was a brilliant move to pull the fact that they could get him was great, but to have Sean Connery, James Bond, play his father, and to play him in such a way where Sean Connery is not a tough guy in that movie. Sean Connery is not Bond. He's the opposite of Bond. He's very intellectual. He's a bookworm. He's this character that has forced his son into becoming the opposite of just that. You start to see they're very believable as father and son, I think. I don't know if you felt that way. I don't know if you thought it was stunt casting but I really like that relationship in that film. And Connery gives a really good performance, especially at that point, which could have been very maudlin, could have been very obvious, but that point where he realizes he's lost his son, or at least he believes he's lost his son. It's underwritten, but Connery plays it beautifully, where you could see it in his eyes. You could see the regret. You can see that final realization of having never connected with your son because of your own shortcomings. And if you've had a relationship with your mother or your father in that manner at some point, it that's one of the great things is when you look at the screen and you see something that you can kind of relate to. Because
Yeah.
I can
I
see
mean,
that, I got a little bit of that.
yeah. There's a cynical part of me that's like, yeah, even his home life origin story is a stereotype.
But what's not a stereotype in
Unoriginal.
this fucking life?
No,
It's
I'm
just
kidding.
like,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But
oh, you fucking dark cloud, you.
but I I think it's an interesting mix because at its best, like
Hmm.
going back to the ride metaphor, it's
Yeah,
like at its best, it's a fun ride
yeah,
that you take what you can take from it and enjoy.
yeah.
Um, but at its worst, by the time you get to the Crystal Skull,
Yeah.
and we'll go through each of these, Leslie and I were talking about this, like it feels like a Disney movie adaptation of a Disney ride,
And that's the thing.
only worse.
I don't think Spielberg's heart is in making that movie. And I think that's what made it easy for him to walk away from Dial of Destiny. I think there's a sense of just keep it exciting. And it is. It has a great opening. Crystal Skull has a great opening. I love that, going into Area 51 and finding that box, the callback to the Ark,
Yeah,
but the ridiculousness of Indiana Jones being chased through this warehouse by Russians who were shooting at him as he's running across rafters. I like the play on the old age damn, I thought that was closer. I mean, that was funny to me. To me, it worked. And then the thing that everybody hates about the series that I fucking loved. I loved that refrigerator bit. That thing was so
oh
stupid
yeah,
and moronic. People really came out like that was insulting. It was the
that was
worst thing that has ever.
that was the straw that broke the camel's back
Yeah,
was the refrigerator.
yeah, exactly. Whereas you saw him you saw him fight a tank. You saw
Yeah,
him
you're about
fight
fucking 30 years too late with that.
you saw you saw him fight a tank. You saw him fly out of an airplane on a fucking raft, on an inflatable raft. You The movie is nothing but ridiculousness, but it's
And everyone's
fun.
slumming in it.
Yeah, but you know what I loved about that? I love the fact that the idea comes to Ford, it comes to Jones in that moment. It's a fucking Hail Mary pass. But as he's emptying out that refrigerator and he starts to get into it, what does Spielberg do? He gives you that close up of the refrigerator where it says lead lined. Like that's supposed to be enough to tell you, yeah, this would work. It's such a fucking
Just in case you were
yeah.
wondering, you know?
It's lead lined. So yeah. And this thing is gonna get shot through the sky like a fucking rocket, traveling 20 miles, propelled 20 miles, and hit somewhere in the desert, and our hero is supposed to survive that. I was screaming in the theater. I had such a fucking great laugh at that. It was so moronic, but so in keeping with what these films are. That it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me at all. I loved it.
Let's go through the
Let's go
movies.
through them. Okay,
Yeah.
so with Temple of Doom, you have 1935. Lucas, Spielberg, they wanted to do a film where they didn't want to have to deal with Nazis this time. They had done the Nazi things in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So set it as a prequel, and it's really interesting when you watch it from that perspective, where you watch it now, realizing that this is the Indiana Jones before the Ark, and he goes on this very. It's a very basic adventure. It's a very basic kind of the exoticism of India, and let's just get all the shit out of the way of the things that it's going to be criticized for. The White Saviour,
Mm-hmm.
the quirky kid. Kate Capshaw is annoying as
The
fuck in
Asian
it,
kid.
but
Yeah.
she's not as bad as I remembered her
Oh, Kate
being.
Capshaw.
Kate
Well,
Capshaw.
wait. The quirky kid is all. It's like the quirky Asian stereotypical kid.
Yeah, he is, but what is he, except for an accent, what is stereotypically Asian about him? I don't know.
I. That's a good question because it's like, okay, does that mean that? Because that it's like did for example, did Spielberg say, okay, I want you to be the worst stereotype that you can of what I think your culture is and what other people think
Mhm.
your culture is? Um, or is it just that me even saying that it comes because I'm adding that to an already pre-existing pile of stereotypical shit for Asians,
I think that's what it is,
specifically
and
India,
I have done the same
because
thing. Yeah,
because the portrayal, the eating, the look, different cultures eat
weird
different
shit.
things that other
Yeah.
people think maybe are weird, right?
Hmm.
Um, but it just looks like a ridiculous fucking stereotype.
Well, we'll
Um,
get to that. We were talking about Ke Huy Quan
it,
though,
right.
and I don't
Okay,
see
so we'll,
anything stereotypical about him. Except for an accent, he just looked like a little kid to me. He just looked like a little
okay,
kid that was, and I
an
think he
annoying,
was
yeah.
good for that. I thought it was a very good performance by a
And you
child
do cheer
actor.
for him. You're like, this kid has heart.
Hmm.
He is he's a good sidekick character.
Yeah,
And he's very much more likable and more redeemed than the Kate Capshaw character,
yeah, exactly,
yeah, she's very annoying.
very much. But it's in keeping with a kind of screwball character
Yes.
that I think Spielberg was going for. A Judy Holliday kind of thing, or a Betty Grable, crazy and wild, and just so consumed with her own bullshit. But it wasn't as bad as I remembered it being. I didn't hate Kate Capshaw as much as I once did, but she's the love interest. There always needs to be a woman in these things. It needs to be there needs to be that kind of. I don't think there needs to be, but it just seems to be the case that that's what they do with these
Yeah.
films.
Yeah, because it's like these are
Hmm.
it's kind of these are built on traditions,
Yeah.
Hollywood traditions, because
Hmm.
this is very much like a Tarantino.
Yeah.
Spielberg is a student of cinema, and uses the tropes
Hmm.
to kind of stack stories on top of stories
Yeah.
in order to create this thing that I tease when I say stereotype and unoriginal and blah blah blah. But he's calling back to Humphrey Bogart. He's calling back to these characters. He's calling back to and also to his own film because he's like, well, you're gonna watch this movie and you're gonna say, well, that's not Marion. That's
Yeah.
definitely not Marion. And you're gonna start picking your favorite characters and the characters you love to hate the most. in the series, and definitely I have my characters and the films themselves that I hate the most.
You're going to, and it would be difficult to not. It would be difficult not to do that. I mean, it's a very rare thing when I see a film that I don't have at least one problem with. I mean, it's just it's a matter of how the film, how you read the film, how it affects you, what it touches on. Her fucking voice. You know, I we're not taking it. You and I, neither of us know what it's like to be an Asian American man of a certain age, and the shit that they would have to deal with being called short round. But you would have to talk to one of your Asian friends for that. But I know it did affect them in the same way that I know that the depictions of Indians in the film. I knew a lot of Indian people from college who wouldn't have been offended by this film so much as the effect of people saying shit to them about their culture based on this film. Do you really eat snakes? Do you really eat monkey brains? There was a lot of people. It's like my true honest opinion is the stereotype of the film is never as bad as the reaction of ignorant people in the audience and how it's going to affect back on those people. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
I think it does. I'm just trying to think about that because if you have a stereotype, I mean, you have ignorant people that are supposedly these people in the audience.
Yeah.
And let's say you have a stereotype that exists outside of film, and then you have these ignorant people that adopt that stereotype, and then they make a film, and then they put that stereotype in the film. So now it's something that other ignorant people in the audience are going to watch. It just keeps perpetuating itself. So it's like, but you're saying it's not. It's the reaction is more than the depiction, and I don't know if that's true.
I don't know if it is true, but I think the reaction is worse, is what I'm saying. Is that okay? I can see,
but the depiction is the one that creates the reaction.
Yes. Well, it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing. It's like who's fucking wagging the dog. I get that, but the thing about it is like, am I offended by depictions of Mexicans in film, or am I offended by the white asshole who believes that's what we are? Sometimes I'll look at a film and I'll be like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, that's just fucking wrong." Are you fucking kidding me? But
you have to ask yourself, you're focusing on the audience, but you have to ask yourself, well, what about the person who put that depiction in the film? Like,
yeah,
it's
that's
kind
true.
Of like, this is the supply side now. Whether there's a demand for the stereotype or not,
okay,
like, people are putting it out there.
I'll give you a perfect example. My dad asked me yesterday. My dad was watching Gangs in New York. And he was talking to me about Daniel Day-Lewis, and then he was asking me about other films that he's made. He was like, what about this one? What about that one? He said, Last of the Mohicans. And I was like, a lot of people like it. It's typical. It's fucked up because guys like Terrence Malick with The New World and Michael Mann with Last of the Mohicans, I figured these are intelligent, typically more insightful directors. And if you remember back to those episodes where we talked about both of those films, I was really just fucking disappointed.
Well, we did a survey of Native American cinema in general. And so that's when we talked about it. Yeah.
We talked about those two films, and I said what bothered me is that it's typical white people shit, where it's just it's a very surface understanding of the culture without any kind of real in-depth, but it's always a white guy who comes into it and is probably the better Indian than any of the other Indians there. That's the impression I got with Last of the
It was
Mohicans.
yeah, and okay, that was episode 168
168.
from
Yeah.
2018. Yeah, so go to the Libsyn for that. You need to do that
Mm-hmm.
if you want to hear that.
It's a good episode. It's a really good episode, and there's some really good
All our shit is
selections
good.
of films there because there's there are films there that you, if you're not hearing them from us, you're probably not going to know about these films. There's a couple of them there at least.
Yeah, that aren't these films.
Yeah, that aren't these films.
That aren't a version of Dune, which is doing the same thing. That aren't a version of the Kevin Costner
Dances with Wolves. Yeah.
Dances with Wolves. And this is also doing the same thing without Harrison Ford doesn't embrace the culture and elevate it or save it, but he does go in and save it.
Mm-hmm.
And it does have these racist portrayals, and then that goes all the way into the Crystal Skull, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
Which are these, like, they are racist, monstrous portrayals of these people, and
primitive people. Let's be specific about that. It's depicting
savage,
yes,
savage people. That's basically the concept, and I don't think that Spielberg and George Lucas and whoever else are sitting there. And probably John Milius in the next room, fucking thinking about surfing and fucking like
smoking a cigar,
but it's like the thing is that it becomes, well, we're gonna build it on older shit, older white man's burden, Kipling, Gunga Din, the Thuggee cult that is questionable. These savage killers who they worship Kali, a god, this dark-skinned Shakti goddess that these colonial stories about sacrifices to her and not really a deep understanding of what that goddess means or whatever. It's kind of like, well, we're just going to put it in an we're just going to use this.
Mm-hmm. It's a MacGuffin
it's a MacGuffin. There are these Shankara stones that on some level that's the lingam. They symbolize like the masculine of the masculine feminine, like complementary duality. So we have to we're just going to use that as the MacGuffin in this film. This is the Maltese Falcon for this movie.
Yeah.
In one it's the Ark, in the other it's the Grail, and the other it's this, and the other it's that. This is this. We're going to put it in a different locale. It's just kind of, you're just following a formula here, and he has to go in and find this, and he has to save these people. And so then at this point, there's going to be, this is the big guy that he fights in this film.
It's the same guy. Dies. You know that?
Is it really?
It is.
Well, that's even, I mean...
It's the same guy.
You.
It's Pat Roach.
Thank you.
They darkened him up, and they put a turban on him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so... My point exactly. And so it's not, I don't think, coming from a place of, and this is, you can argue this. Some people would say, well, Steven Spielberg is being racist. I don't think it's, I just think it's, they're not even thinking about that.
Yeah.
That which is in itself racist. It's just, like that story you told me earlier before we were recording, you don't have to repeat.
Yeah.
It's when people, they just take things for granted, and it's just kind of like, it's fine. And I'm not someone that's like, oh, you have to be super activist and super.
No, let's be honest about that. We're not sensitive to this shit. You and I are sitting here like.
Listen, I think we're sensitive to it in terms of like, we're aware of it. And
that's not sensitive. That's aware of it and respectful of the situation. But like, like when we've talked about racist shit that we've experienced or that we have seen, we're not. When I heard that Howard Stern interview with that KKK member, that Grand Wizard, I don't remember what the hell his name was, and Stern asked him, "What do you mean about the Mexican situation is out of control?" And he said, "Well, goddamn it, where I'm from, the Mexicans are starting to outbreed the humans." I did not get offended.
It probably made you laugh because the
I
ridiculousness
laughed
of it.
my ass off. I found that
Of
clip.
course.
I showed it to everybody that I knew, and some people were offended, but I was laughing my
Well, yeah.
ass off. I
But
was
that's
like, you know what I
obviously
mean?
that's also why you find it funny is because it is so fucked up and offensive.
Oh
But
yeah,
that's the nature of fucking like that's out of pure stand up. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like that's a joke. That's coming from that subconscious fucking dark place that like
Hmm. Yeah.
makes you laugh at shit. Like that's why. That's dark humor.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Um this I don't think is I think this is not necessarily that. This is just we're just gonna it could have been monsters.
Hmm.
But we're not gonna use monsters. We're gonna use these characters. The thing is that these characters are based on people,
Yeah.
and so it's like somewhere in the process of oh yeah, whatever. They forgot to think of humans, right? And so then when someone gets offended, then it's kind of like, well, oh shit, like that's not what I meant, or you're overreacting, or I don't know what their response is, but you get those responses of like, ah, you're overthinking it, blah blah, and it's not that the person who was offended is necessarily overthinking it; it's that the person who created it was underthinking it,
Yeah.
and so it's kind of like, well, you're gonna get what you fucking put out. You're gonna get that fucking equal or opposite reaction, and that's what you fucking put out because either you did it on purpose or you were just fucking lazy or you didn't care, and that's fine, but that's what it is. So it's like I'm not gonna fucking cry about it, and not only because I mean, I don't identify with any of those characters or whatever, but it's kind of like I am gonna in this podcast as a vehicle for whatever the fuck I want to say in my half of it, I am going to point that out. And we're going to be critical of it.
Yeah.
And because it's there. Regardless of what, and if, you know, people are going to say, well, this is just part of this fucking woke conspiracy to fucking like undermine everything and turn everything into an issue of power and hierarchy and blah, blah, blah. You have to be able to be critical. And you have to understand, like, colonialist ideas. And you have to be able to criticize those. And you also have to be able to criticize people who criticize them if they do it in a certain way that is also silly. So you have to be able to criticize everything. And should fucking this movie be canceled? I don't think so. That's a bigger question is like, should movies be canceled? But I think when it comes up, it should fucking come up.
I don't think you do anybody any service by pretending that this shit doesn't exist, that it doesn't, that these are not the attitudes that prevailed during the time, that this is not, the fact of the matter is it racist against Indian people? Of course it's racist. It's incredibly racist. Is it done with the intent of being, is it a focused and mean-spirited racism? And I know that sounds very... How are you going to defend that? But what I'm saying is that people have a tendency to just... It's a plot point. That's all it is in this movie. Which in a way is almost even worse. Yeah. But, I mean, it depends on how you fucking look at it.
It's not a it's not the Nazis are the heroes racism,
Yeah.
but it's just this offhanded kind of internalized racism that it's just kind of like, well, whatever. That this is not a big deal. This is just
Mm-hmm.
these are just characters.
Yeah.
And going back to what I said, it's like, well, the characters are based on people.
Yeah.
And so how? What about the people? How do you feel about that? Well, I'm just telling a story. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but they're gonna give a fuck. So just know that. And whether you care about how much of a fuck they give or what kind of fuck they give, that's a different story. But obviously, people do, and that's what you get. If they think, and then there are people who they don't care. It's just fucking. They're just gonna watch the film and move on with their lives. Maybe you're gonna get someone who's like, oh yeah, Indians eat bugs and they whatever based on this film, and they carry that with them. Maybe maybe some don't. Who knows? But the thing is that it is a racist depiction,
Mm-hmm.
and some people are gonna say it's not, but it's kind of that also kind of like reveals who you are and what you think and where you sit politically and all that shit. So I'm in the area that says, yeah, this is a racist depiction. How do you make the movie without? How do you make this movie without that? It's not the same movie.
You could leave that scene out; it would be fine.
But it's not the scene. It's the whole fucking movie.
No,
is
okay.
based on
Well, the depiction of the Kali cult, you could defend it by saying cults have existed throughout throughout the span of human history. There have been these kinds of cults,
and
human
also
sacrifices, shit like that.
I just want to be like a little bit technical on that.
Mm-hmm.
When the way we're using cult, we mean like devotional practice
Yeah,
versus like sociologically like
Jonestown or something.
a Jonestown or some kind of group that follows some kind of modern
Mm-hmm.
as from my like training background or whatever. New religious movement
Yeah,
that is like around a charismatic leader where you abandon your family and you go live with that like that's not what we mean like cult as in
no,
cult leader like that like in popular culture cult. We mean like devotional practice.
yes, absolutely.
So yeah,
So you could argue that, but I think it's the problem that you always have in these types of situations where it's you demonize a culture without showing any kind of. The only depictions of Indians in this film are the Kali cult or the put upon decimated community of mostly women that are weak and crying and
because their
because their children have
sons
been
were
stolen.
stolen to work at a mine.
Yeah,
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 which there's a deeper uh, there's a deeper class, and this kind of goes back to where what you've talked about a
mm-hmm.
lot is that like um, you've kind of taken like more of a Marxist, it sounds like, approach from it, where you're like, well, behind all this other shit is actually this class warfare thing that's going on.
Yeah,
And these kids are stolen from their village or whatever to work these mines.
yeah,
And is in that sense, it's like the monster behind the monster. Is the monster really this cult of Kali worshippers that based on this goddess who is provocative and inspired the Rolling Stones logo, and pulling out the hearts and all that, or is the monster these kids working in the mind? You know what I mean? Like, that's something that is like, to me, that's what's behind it. That's the under story that isn't really focused on. Obviously, he has to rescue them, and that's the point, and blah, 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 because they're there working for this cult, but it's kind of... have you seen Enter the Dragon or not?
Not yet, no.
Okay. Then never mind. But
we're going to get to that on our Bruce Lee. Yeah.
And you're going to get whatever you put together from me making that association, mm-hmm. You're going to do that anyway, without me going any further. But there's a lot of times like a layer of villainy in these films, but then there's an underlayer that is, with Star Wars, it's like, well, this spiritual, religious, whatever kind of mystical warfare between the Jedi and the Sith, but we're really talking about fucking colonization, a fucking empire.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, that's
sure.
What we're really talking about. But the focus is on this other layer up here. So that's another element, and it's interesting to me that you have, on a certain level, a critique of what can be like considered this, even if it's not colonist, it's still exploitation of these children.
Mm-hmm.
But it still uses colonial tropes in the telling of the saving of those children.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't escape me. I'm sitting here. The way I look at it, it's Spielberg, Lucas, the writers are looking at a situation. They're like, give me a culture, give me a situation, and I'll hang gags off of it. This is a Buster Keaton style.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's just Buster Keaton storytelling. Let's get a general idea. We have a prop. Let's build a story around it. So, because all of these films are really just about Indiana Jones. It's his the driving force of all of these films is that character.
Yeah.
And everything.
You need a situation and you have to get out of it.
Mm-hmm. But it's also the brains that he brings into it and the discoveries he makes while he's there. So he's not necessarily, he's constantly learning. He's constantly being challenged. He's not challenging himself. I get the sense that Indiana Jones thinks that he knows more than he knows in any given situation. And when he starts finding out more, he says it at the end of the movie, and it's a very obvious thing for Spielberg to put in there. He was like, the old Indian man says, "Now you understand." He's like, "Yes, I understand." That's a very obvious scene to put in a movie like this. If it weren't for Harrison Ford's sincerity as an actor, I think I would jump all over it. But there's something about Ford that makes things believable. I get the sense he is. I think it's the closest thing to, you and I talked about Rick Deckard, Han Solo, and Indiana Jones, and why it was that this is the film that resonates most powerfully with Harrison Ford in the performances, and I think it's because it resembles Ford. There's a certain goodness that he appears to have. He could be a huge fucking asshole. I don't know. He's grumpy as shit in interviews, and I love that. But he could
And
be a
he
complete
seems very nervous and
yeah,
like out of place,
yeah.
which kind of makes him more human.
It does. It absolutely does, and I think that comes out in the movies too, though, because he's not. He is confident. He's not. He's not overly confident. He's not a blowhard. He's not. He's not the character that Kurt Russell plays in Big Trouble in Little China. He's not Jack Burton, but that works for what it. That works for that film because he's such a blowhard. Because he's so completely out of his depth. It's an interesting contrast, Big Trouble in Little China, the Jack Burton character versus the Indiana Jones character, the John Wayne blowhard versus this guy. It's an interesting comparison. But with this film, I definitely get the sense that Ford, in his portrayal, and I think this is why only Ford can play this guy. I think the idea of trying to reboot it or to try to bring somebody new or to kick it off to either have somebody else play Indiana Jones or to shuffle it off to Shia LaBeouf like they were like what it looked like in the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It would have been a bad idea because what brings us back to this character is not it's not the adventure. It's Indiana Jones in the adventure. It's how he's going to deal with the situation. It's the brains, it's the study, it's the wherewithal that he has in any given situation to understand. Even if he's only understanding it at the last minute, he's understanding what he's up against, and he's moving towards conquering it. And as I watch that, I love the character. I love the character. And watching it the way I did in preparation for this episode and the previous episodes, it was. I think it was great to go back to childhood, but I was also thrilled to reflect on what all of that meant. The power of this character. There's a goodness to him. There's a nobility to him. Um, Even though he's a grave robber, he's you know. I honestly think though he does believe the character believes that we should study and respect the past, and I
And
think
that they
that's
would,
yeah,
that these treasures would be better off in a museum, probably for preservation purposes, than they
yeah.
would be in the hands of their own people. Um, and
Well, that's implied in the
it
in the
is implied,
films. In the films, it's more about keeping it out of the hands of private collectors.
or fucking Nazis that would use it for world domination.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But it's a matter
I
of
mean,
study
but
and it's a matter of understanding.
yeah.
But yeah, but
And
yeah,
look,
yeah,
there's an aspect of that. You can you can go to sites in Guatemala, for example, that guides there will tell you, um, Tikal, for example, um, where this amazing pyramid site, Mayan pyramid site, most of it remains unearthed, um, because the government and government corruption and bureaucracy won't use finances properly in order to excavate and preserve and study the site. Um, so most of it remains buried. So you're walking around and your guide will say, "See that hill? That's a pyramid. Underneath it, um,
that's crazy.
see that see that mound with the tree sticking out of it? That's a pyramid. A smaller pyramid, but
Hmm.
it's a pyramid. Um, and you're just looking at this like forest or jungle landscape, and the thing is that the ancient Maya created a city there. They carved out all of the jungle to create a city, and then when they abandoned that city, the jungle basically swallowed it back up, and it's one of those things. So there are examples of modern corrupt, or whether it's corruption or just bureaucracy or you name it, whatever, where obviously universities and institutions would preserve certain objects, relics, artifacts, sites, whatever, in a way that maybe governments wouldn't. But that's obviously a debate also, and a lot of nations are asking, for example, with British museums, for them to give certain items back, because it's like, well, was it taken? How was it taken? Where? Blah blah blah. So that's also an ongoing conversation.
Sure. But it's also it's more than just that. It's more than just a pot. It's more than just a mask. It's bones. It's how many Native American communities in the United States are fighting for the preservation of grave sites, or to win
boarding school grave sites, etc.
To get back bones from different places that have this shit on display. I mean, it's one thing to display a pot. It's another thing to display a human being. I mean, regardless of what some of us might believe in, religion-wise, or the soul, or the desecration of the body, the consecration of the body, I should say. There is something to be said about, you honor your dead by putting them in a coffin and in the ground, and believe that it should be respected. Why should it be any different for the practices of these cultures to save and worship their dead, to lay to rest their dead in a respectful and culturally appropriate way? It's weird because these films, when you start digging into these films, there's a lot more.
Nice pun.
What's that?
I said nice pun.
Yeah. Appreciate it, yeah. When you do that, you start uncovering certain problematic truths of the world that we live in. When the majority of people would just watch these movies and say, that's a cool chase scene. I can't believe he got dragged underneath that car. And maybe that's all that the filmmakers are intending, but there is an aspect of it that you and I are debating, and I enjoy this debate. I'm not sitting here going, and anybody who says, why can't it just be a good time? Why can't it just be fun? Why can't it, this is a stupid adventure story. Why are you making more out of it than what it is? And I was like, because that makes it more exciting to me.
And the thing is that it is just whatever fun, whatever, to someone who is making that argument. That's all it is. And for whatever reason, whoever's making that argument is upset that someone else is talking about something else involved in it on a deeper level. Why does that bother you? Why not? That's itself just a metaphor. As you described it, you're digging into the films. You're finding deeper levels to it. Otherwise, you're not going to get the treasure. If there are treasures to be found in this film, I guess that is also a part of the debate. Is like, are they on the surface or are they in the deep? But obviously, we want to go towards a more multifaceted. We want to take that deeper approach. So moving from kind of these elements of what we talked about, and then whatever you want to talk about with Temple of Doom, also you can always just call it back. But moving into the Last Crusade, 5 years or however many years later, what is that?
Well, 5 years of filmmaking later, 3 years later in the chronology, I think this was the end of the series, and it probably should have been the end of the series, as far as a highlight. There's it's a sweet. There's an aspect of it being a sweet father-son conflict story there, and like I said, I think Ford and Connery, as ridiculous as it is, because Sean Connery was only 12 years older than Harrison Ford. You know, 12 years to make it look right. Sean Connery always had to have a beard in this film, and Harrison Ford always had to be mostly clean shaven, so that they could appear like father and son. You know, that's just a little bit aspect of movie making. But what's exciting about this film is that it's back to a grander story, like the Ark or the Covenant. Now you got the Nazis back. You're going into Germany. You're going back into religious ideology and artifacts, and like we said last week with Raiders of the Lost Ark, when you the power of religion is such that using it as a MacGuffin almost elevates the importance of it. The sheer fact of religious idolatry, or the power of certain religious symbols or objects, forces your hand as a movie watcher, and now you're sitting here going, well, this is way more important than some of the other shit that he could be going after. This is God.
And right. And there's also the element, if we're going to compare it to Temple of Doom,
yeah,
this is also Western religion.
Yeah.
So already in culturally as let's say let's just say so-called Western or primarily American moviegoers or whatever have on some level a deeper understanding with, or maybe not even deeper, but have some kind of reference point. Let's just say that they have some kind of reference point to the Holy Grail, even as an object. Even if you don't know what the Holy Grail is, which I'll give a brief description of it, but even if you don't know what the Holy Grail is, you understand that there's an expression that this is the Holy Grail of blah blah blah. This is it means that it's something that's hard to find or sought after or pursued, versus in Temple of Doom, they can use Indian devotional figures or religion or spirituality or mysticism or whatever, and it just comes off as, this is just spooky or quirky or weird or whatever, and it's just this bloodthirsty savage thing. No, this is the Knights of the Holy Grail. This is, even if you don't know about it, it's like, is that some kind of King Arthur thing? Is that kind of, okay, so there, and it has to do something with Jesus, and okay, so then this is actually real. That other stuff is whatever, doesn't matter. This is real, and this is this is interesting. This is the Last Crusade. What is that? And we have a tradition in the so-called West of the Holy Grail. The romantic tradition of stories of heroes going after this thing. The Nazis are the villains in this case, and they had their own fucking interest, some of them, in the Holy Grail, which I talked about in the last couple episodes. And the Holy Grail, what is it? It's typically the cup that Christ drank from at the Last Supper. And so you have the Crusades, which were Christian holy war literally holy war. That's a Christian concept, separate from post 9/11 jihad ideas and all this and that. Holy war expeditions from Western Europe to the Middle East, the Holy Land, Jerusalem, against Muslim rule, primarily. Secondarily, there were also like the so-called reconquest of Spain, which was against Muslim rule, or the Iberian Peninsula as a whole, pushing back against Muslim expansion, against Eastern Christians, so the Greek church, after the church split. You have the Albigensian Crusade in southern France against the Cathars. That's when you get into like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, conspiracy, Da Vinci Code, Knights Templar, and all that stuff. But the idea is that these crusades to the east in medieval times created a genre of romance, these medieval chivalry, ideas of how the knights how they behaved, these romances, these odes. This Christian knight has to go on a quest. You have Arthurian legends, Percival, knights going off, behaving in a certain way, and some of that, like, goes both ways in terms of chivalry and chivalric legend, in terms of like Salahuddin, who is the Muslim like honorable figure, or Saladin, versus these Arthurian type of knights, the damsels. You get all of these different kind of tropes that come out of that, and a lot of that stuff feeds right into all the way into Star Wars. And so that's more accessible, or more kind of available in the cultural lexicon to the average moviegoer, who maybe they don't know any of this stuff, but they know, they've heard about it, and they know, people know what a knight is. It's a guy on a horse, you know? Like, yeah. That's literally what a chivalry is. The cheval is the horse. So it's a guy in armor on a horse who jousts, maybe. But then, okay, it's this cup. Okay, so now it's Indiana Jones going after the cup. But he's also going after his dad. And so then now it ties back to when I made fun of Steven Spielberg's family life, or whatever the fuck. It's now we're getting into another aspect of a storyline that's also a trope. That this is, whether it's the hero's journey or whatever, there is atonement with the father is one of those steps, that whether that's, you know, that can be viewed as an artificial way of looking at storytelling, where it's like, did Joseph Campbell really go and find all these things because they exist, or did he kind of like impose his own view on all of these stories? Which that's also what it is. But the fact of the matter is that in storytelling, that's one of the motifs that you're going to get a lot of times, is someone who, whether it's psychology, Jungian, whatever, in order to like integrate themselves and mature, or whatever, they have to overcome their upbringing. They have to overcome their origins. They have to overcome their father, their mother, and become an individual, but also coming to terms with overcoming and coming to terms with what came before them, and how that affects who they are. And so that's how you get this story of Indiana Jones going after that cup, which supposedly within this story, you drink from it, and it gives you immortality, or fountain of youth, or this kind of idea. So you have a more mature Indiana Jones dealing with his father, Dr. Jones, and a flashback with the River Phoenix as a young Indiana Jones, where you kind of get to see how he got the look, the fear of snakes,
the scar on the chin, yeah,
the scar,
where the whip comes from, yeah,
the whip, yeah. So you this the idea of, oh, this thing should be in a museum. Um, it really brings it all the way around. And as you said, it was supposed to be the ending.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's talk about this one.
Well, I think as a trilogy, it rounds it out beautifully. I don't know what it is about a trilogy that seems to be the thing that you want to go towards. That you maybe it has to do with God. Maybe it has to do with the Father, the Father and the Son, the Holy Spirit, and all that. A trilogy of
Or the
life or
life
something.
cycle, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like you have childhood, adulthood, and old age,
it makes sense. I like the way this series plays out because I thought it was a beautiful ending. I know I'm in the minority. I know I'm one of the few people that really dug Dial of Destiny, but I really loved the way it played out into the old man trope that I'm so fond of that wasn't in this one. It was interesting to see him as a son. It was interesting to see that uh, that acquiescence to the father, that constant search for approval, and it's exaggerated in this film. It's played for comic effect, but there is a real sense of struggle between the two of these characters, Henry Jones Sr. and Henry Jones Jr., and an allusion to a mother that passed away early in his life and the struggles that imparted on him. Um, I found all of this really interesting. In a very exciting, well done story that, as far as the action was concerned, really, really delivered. I mean, the scene where there's some fun escaping from the castle. There's all of that fire, the way that little word interplay between Connery and Ford as they go back and forth trying to figure out how the hell they're going to escape. Going into the fireplace and then spinning around into all of that shit was a lot of fun. It was a fun, humorous, good time. It didn't have the weight. It wasn't dark like Temple of Doom, and it didn't have the weight of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was more of a personal story that I really dug and I really had a good time with, and it was good to see John Rhys Davis back as Salah, and it was good
Mm-hmm.
to see Denholm Elliott. And Denholm Elliott. That's kind of sad because he was dying during the making of this film, and it
Mm.
was it was a good it was a good farewell to him. It was great to see him um, play this really ridiculous comic character that he was not in the first film. He was not as goofy and as ill prepared for what was this adventure that they were going to have. Um, and that tank scene, I gotta say, that's one of the best choreographed, best cut um, action sequences that I've seen in a movie. Because with an action scene, it's important to know where everything is in relationship to everything else. So you know that Jones Sr. is, you know, Marcus and Jones Sr. are in the tank. Jones is outside of the tank riding on this horse, zigging, zagging, serpentining all over the place, trying to stay out of gun range, and yet having to get on that tank. Um, when he's hanging off onto that side gun, that shit was exciting. It was a lot of fun. I don't know how you felt about it. I mean, in order for in order for you to truly enjoy these films, you have to kind of turn your brain off to the bigger picture of the story. You have to kind of turn off your brain to the politics of the story, um, the
Yeah, that's
social
for
aspects.
after.
What's that?
The 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 politics and all that is for after you
Yes.
watch the movie.
Hmm.
It's for once you get off the ride.
Exactly.
Um, when you're
Then you
digesting
could
and
start
saying like, "What did
nitpicking
I
it.
just see?" Yeah,
Exactly. But while
yeah.
you're in it,
Um,
you need to be concentrated on, holy shit, I can't believe he did that. Oh my god, I can't believe he did that. The ridiculousness of the hat falling off and then coming back at him. In the trailer for this film, they did a teaser trailer for the film, and it was all behind the scenes. So you could see lights, you could see Lucas, you could see Spielberg. They're in the trailer, and it's a funny trailer because I remember being in a theater watching this trailer, and they would have to reset all the time because the hat kept flying off. There were like 4 shots of the hat just flying off, and then they cut to a scene where Harrison Ford, he puts the hat on and he takes a staple gun and he staples it to his head, and he was like, "That ought to do it." It was very funny, very funny.
Mm.
But it's the
Hmm.
ridiculousness of this fucking. There are points. I think I was watching Crystal Skull yesterday where I asked myself, I wonder if at any time they thought the hat was a bad fucking idea.
That's the most iconic part of it, you know?
It's iconic looking, and the
Right.
fact that he wears it the way he does, beautiful. But can you imagine? Can you imagine your frustration as a director or as an actor? You're trying to get this shot, and the fucking hat keeps flying off.
Right, of course.
I mean, just from that perspective, I wonder, wow, what if
Yeah,
they,
the practicality of it.
yeah, the practicality of it, and but that hat, the khakis, the leather jacket, and the whip, you see, and that, you know, it was great with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. We're just gonna jump ahead one second.
Yeah.
You jump ahead, and your first introduction of Jones is the hat hitting the ground, and then the hat going on the head in shadow. Everybody knows. And when I was in that theater, the scream of enjoyment, of delight, it was overpowering. It was really a beautiful thing. It was a great moment to have with a collective audience. Of what I was seeing was the return of an old friend, and I'm watching it with people who were there when I saw it in '81, and are now seeing it with their kids and their kids'
Yeah,
kids.
it's the nostalgic. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
there is something to that. I'm not that guy, but I guess I am, regardless of
I
how I
mean,
want
yeah,
to. Yeah, you don't play the
softened.
fucking tough guy. You're always going to be. There's always that. There's always something there that is going to pull you into the magic of the childhood of. And to watch that interplay between um, the Joneses, and to see the difficulty the son has in trying to impress the father, and the father's indifference to everything. Um, I thought it played well. I don't think it was resolved, but I thought it was really played well. I thought they interacted with. I thought they interacted very well. Um, it could have been stunt casting. It could have been an obvious just, oh yeah, there's James Bond. Here's Indiana Jones. There's James Bond. But
Yeah,
it didn't turn into that. It turned into more than that, and I loved it because of it. And it's just fun to see Sean Connery play such a goofy character, a guy who's
yeah,
just
it's
clueless
not what
about
you
things.
think of him.
Yeah, he's not James Bond cool. He's not. He's kind of, he's bookish. He's kind of nerdy.
Right.
There were a lot of times where they could have had him knock somebody out. They didn't do it. I don't know if that's Spielberg and Lucas or if that was Sean Connery. But Connery being brave enough to play that role in that manner, I can imagine Stallone. Stallone would look at a role like that and say, "I don't get to hit anybody. I can't be the father and hit somebody. Why the fuck would I want to do that? There's no, you know what I mean? Where there's no, the ego is not so great, and I love that about it. The way it plays out doesn't have the excitement of Raiders or Temple of Doom. In a weird way, it's a kind of it's a little bit anticlimactic. After that great
Well, I mean,
tank scene. Yeah.
well, it's kind of um, in a weird. If you look at it in terms of a trilogy, it's kind of like it's supposed to be after the climax 'cause it's supposed to resolve. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, even though the Temple of Doom is like the prequel, um,
Mm-hmm.
if you think of it the way they were released, you can either think of it two ways. I guess if you were to look at it as like in terms of some kind of fucking like chronological cut, and you were to watch Temple of Doom first, or if you just look at it in the standard order, either way, either the Ark of the Covenant fucking scene is like the big fucking point, the
Yeah.
ending of that, or else there's that, and then you go to Indiana Jones going to this really dark place, in a mine, like literally like underneath. He goes down into the underworld basically,
Hell, basically, yeah.
and is able to come back himself again, to now kind of go off and share this woman with his father basically, and
Yeah.
and that it's a bookend with the Nazis, so it's just about resolving everything.
Yeah.
He's literally getting that resolution with his father. He saves his father. He's doing all this, all of that, where it is supposed to tie it up with a bow. I mean, how would that have been? Now we have the benefit of we just saw the fifth one, which really resolves everything.
Yes.
For
I mean,
him,
everything is tied up in the fifth one. I mean,
yeah.
There are no loose ends.
But how would it have been had there only been these three? I think it would have been a stronger ride. As I'm going to keep going back to this series. You get through I don't know if there's how much more you want to say about that one, but we move on to Indiana Jones Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, right?
Yeah. Now, this is the one that you hadn't seen. You had never seen this one.
Right.
Had you purposely avoided it, or what was your thinking? You were never really into the character, so it was not a big deal to you? What happened?
Yeah, I just think it was just kind of, it just came and went, and I didn't pay attention.
Okay. Fair enough.
And
I mean,
so that's just what happened. And then Leslie had seen them all, and then so we saw it, and we're just talking shit.
Was it just blasé? Did you have a major problem with the whole thing?
I had problems with it, but at this point it just became, and this is the last one that I saw.
Yeah.
Because we did the cold watch of
Dial.
Part 5, Dial. So I'm seeing how it made sense that they would make the fifth one in order to tie up everything that built up to it. But it's like, well, yeah, but in order to get there, we had to go through the fourth one.
Yeah.
Or because of the fourth one, you had to do the fifth one. However you view it. The problem is that Leslie said that by the time you get to the fourth one, this is how she felt, and I think really it connects to what you're talking about with the iconic hat and everything. Is that she's like, by the time you get to this one, it just feels like cosplay.
Oh, that's interesting.
And yeah, that's why I'm mentioning it.
Okay, because, no, I get it.
Because you have Kate Blanchett, Kate Blanchett, slumming the fuck out of it. I mean,
is she yes, she's slumming, but is she having a good time?
I think she is, but
Yeah.
she's also slumming.
She's
Um,
yes, she is slumming. Yes. This is not tar.
John Hurt, no.
And this is not even
Um,
this isn't even coffee and cigarettes. She's
right,
slumming.
right. And I think I think
Yeah.
she's had fun, obviously, like
Mm-hmm.
doing Dylan and doing all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But whether it's John Hurt or even Ray Winstone playing the fucking like
Yeah.
sidekick guy,
Yeah.
um, everybody's fucking. I mean, he knew what he needed to do.
Yeah.
He knew what he knew what the assignment was, as
Yeah.
they say. Um,
Absolutely.
but at its worst, it does feel like cosplay of itself, and it's a hat with nothing underneath
Mm-hmm.
except for ancient aliens. It just ends up being. I mean, the references. I like some of those references. I mean, I think remote viewing and psychic spies are interesting. Men Who Stare at Goats, that kind of First Earth Battalion milieu thing, which was a real thing.
Sure.
The government did a lot of weird, interesting shit.
Did?
Los
Did?
Alamos nuclear test.
They did?
Right, right, and did and still continues.
Yeah.
Depending on what conspiracy theories and some of them prove to be not conspiracy theories but actual
Yeah.
things. But that's the kind of trick, is to like, and I think you have to wait with time to see which ones are the ones that prove to be whatever they prove to be. But the Roswell 1947, all that.
Mhm.
It's got all these references. The Men in Black, but of course mixed with racist depictions of savage South Americans, and
Yeah.
you have somehow Mayans in Peru, and because they're all the same, let's just fucking jumble this thing together, and
Yeah.
and the racism of the ancient alien concept itself,
Yeah.
which, in case you haven't heard, is the concept that, well, aliens built all of these ancient sites. Before, I've talked about the concept, this Aryanism from the Nazis. For certain elements, Himmler, Anna Nerva, certain elements of the Nazi Party that wanted to promote this idea of this master Aryan race from the north as it's the master race of modern Europeans, and everything about civilization, Western civilization, is inherited from the Aryans. And so now we're going to go around looking for evidence to back this up, or we're going to look for things that we can make fit into that concept, either as a pretext to invade or just to build up this concept to lend it some kind of credence, according to us, the Nazis, I'm saying, from their perspective. So, okay, some kind of civilization, some kind of structure from an older civilization must have been the Aryans. Couldn't have been these silly little spear-throwing savages, right? It had to be ancient Aryans. And then somewhere along the way, someone else comes up with this idea of ancient civilizations, civilizational structures, and even civilization. We're using Western models of what civilization is. Okay, pyramids here, pyramids there, whatever. It must have been ancient aliens, because these brown people couldn't have constructed this. How would they have done it? These little spear throwers, forget astronomy, forget science, forget math, forget a concept of the number zero, forget all of that. The idea behind ancient aliens is that brown people weren't smart enough to have civilization or construct any of this. So the only way for them to have been able to be involved at all with let's say a pyramid is aliens had to come and instruct them.
Yeah.
Or help, or the Anunnaki, they were fucking with humanity and whatever, and then you get all these Von Danikins and all these people on the History Channel, or on Joe Rogan's podcast, or on whatever, and they're talking about, well, on Netflix, these are ancient astronauts. Look at this. Let's look with our late 20th or early 21st century concept of what we think an astronaut is, and let's place that onto this artifact. And now this bas relief carving on whatever looks like can't you see that that's a spaceship? How do you not see that that's a spaceship? Look, his hand is on the ignition. This thing is some kind of like breathing apparatus. Duh. How do you not see this? Stop lying to yourself. We've been lied to. There's deeper knowledge out there. The Anunnaki, blah, blah, blah. We'll worry about Bigfoot later. Right now, let's talk about this. And then we can get into vaccines and all that other nonsense. Let's talk about aliens, the stuff that really is important right now. And Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull sells itself completely out to that concept. So you have now the Crystal Skull, which is some kind of fucking alien bone. It's an alien skull.
Yeah.
That he has to go to basically the Inca civilization through being able to read Mayan somehow, because again, those are all the same. And those Indians. We went from the Indians of
the fucking disgust in your voice.
To the Indians
I almost feel white right now. Can you just have a good time? I love you.
It's not that fucking fun.
No, I know.
Say,
I know.
Oh yeah, it's racist as fuck, but I can still enjoy it. It's like, look, I can fucking look at Triumph of the Will, the Nazi documentary of the Olympic Games, and I can say, obviously this is racist as fuck, and this is just a propaganda film, but these are beautiful shots.
Yeah. Well, shit, we didn't defend, but we recognized the birth of a nation. So it's like, we get it. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But it's just, to me, it's like, now you're fucking with people's childhood, but you know what? You need to fuck with people's childhood.
Yeah. Okay, if your childhood was fucking, when did this movie come out?
This was 2006, I think it was. No, wait a minute, was it? 15 years ago, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. Yeah. I'll find it.
Your childhood was this film?
No, not mine. Not mine.
Not your. Well, obviously not yours. But
my childhood was the first film.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that if someone's listening to this and they're taking Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as their childhood, that's fucking with their childhood, that we're talking shit about this movie. I don't think they don't care.
Yeah, I know.
But
a lot of people would say, it's like, oh, come on, why don't you just get off your fucking ethnic high horse and
get back on the low one.
Exactly.
Just get off the horse.
Get behind the mule, okay? So it's just like,
yeah, get on your fucking get on your camel, get on your whatever. Get on your knees.
Yeah.
No, it's there. So
it's absolutely there. Yeah.
So if anyone's arguing that what they're saying is close your eyes, close your mouth. close your ears. Either they're going to say, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil type of thing. Let it be, shut the fuck up and let it be. Or else they're going to say, like, it's just a movie, blah, blah, going back to what we said about the other shit. And it's there, so I'm not going to fucking, like, you don't have to be on a fucking soapbox. It's there. If you see it, it's there.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is not something that I'm fucking pinning on it. This is not something that I'm saying, it's not, we're not saying we see whatever structure and we're doing a Freudian thing where, well, of course, that's a dick. We're not doing that. This is there. The depictions of Mel Gibson could have been a consultant on this fucking film, the way that they show the Native Americans once they're in that, like, that secret alien vault or whatever.
That's Apocalypto was a little bit more nuanced. A little bit more nuanced than that.
Well, how bad is that? Then?
I know.
That a film without nuance would be a little bit more nuanced than this. That this has fucking sub-nuance.
Fucking Mel Gibson, everybody's nuance. Whooping boy. Leave Mel Gibson alone.
Hey.
If he didn't open his mouth, yeah, I know what you mean.
He fucking did it himself.
I know. You're right. I'm not...
he put that shit out there, and so, hey...
and we're still going to watch Mad Max, and we're still going to watch Lethal Weapon, but...
And I'm still going to watch that movie that he endorses that buys into that QAnon Pizzagate bullshit that's
Jesus Christ, you want to go see that shit? Okay.
Well, Leslie and I do not want to go to the theater to pay money to see it, but if it's on a streaming service eventually that we have, we'll watch it so you and I can talk about it.
Yeah, and sounds good. I'll tear into Caviezel for that.
But, and that's more like, again, where do you sit on the politics of it? But this shit is in the movie, and it's kind of like, at this point, if you're not aware of these kind of things, either you're behind or regardless of how you feel about it.
Yeah.
You don't need to take to the streets with a fucking picket sign and boycott. I mean, you can, you cannot, whatever the fuck. Do as your as your race would have you do. Fall into the destiny of your birthright,
Look, I'm not going to argue with it. It's problematic historically and socially. I mean, culturally, it's really problematic. I'm watching a fucking adventure film though, and I sit there and I watch, and I'm like,
from a genre like that.
Yeah,
I mean that is the genre.
Yeah, I know that I'm going to sit here and I'm going to watch it. I'm going to have a good time, and then I'm going to see some shit that I'm like, this is here's the bullshit. Okay, I got to deal with the bullshit because let's be honest. When you're dealing with white people, creative white people, and their expression of storytelling, they're going to go to places that they have no understanding of, and they're just not going to get it. They're not going to understand why this shit is offensive. But
I even get that. But then I'm like, okay, obviously that's also a stereotype, but it also is a stereotype that, like, yeah, and it also gives people who do that a pass within their stereotype. Yeah. Oh, well, you know how white people do. That's basically what you said. And,
yeah, I know, and I say that a lot, so... I know. That's not the first time that I've said that. I know that.
I know, but, this podcast also has its tropes.
Yeah.
But, and it's also, with tongue-in-cheek and, winking at the audience.
Yeah.
But like, no, not all films. We don't talk about this shit on every episode because not every film has this.
No.
If it was like, let's watch fucking Stereotypes with Rick Ramos in cinema, then we would, like I said, Joseph Campbell puts his fucking hero's journey on all these things. He makes it fit. we would be doing that, and we would even extend it into things that, I said, and I agreed with Brody or whatever that I don't remember his name right now, the one who wrote that article about The Quiet Place. That's when we were talking about the films of the
I remember
decades,
that. Yeah.
and for the 2010s or whatever, I said The Quiet Place is one of the is because of its how it resonates culturally. This idea of the silent majority, white people unable to speak in the face of an alien invasion, as a metaphor, right?
I remember loving that.
I think that's a reasonable. You can argue with it, say yes, it is, no, it isn't. But I'm not going to go around and impose that view on every single film and look for. I'm not going to say that. Well, Hollywood itself is this propaganda unit to impose all of these like racist ideas.
Yeah,
Obviously,
but it
racist
is.
ideas come out of Hollywood. Yeah,
But that's the thing.
but
When you have a showcase that is so incredibly powerful as cinema, it would be ridiculous for us to imagine that there aren't people out there using it as propaganda, that aren't using it
yes,
to
that
push
is
an
true.
agenda, even if it's an
But
agenda that they're not completely aware that they're pushing. They're just doing and saying shit that comes naturally to them.
right, but
You know?
Hollywood is not, as it, with anything else, it's not a monolith. So
No,
it's
of
not
course not.
like it's not one group, because racists can also say, well, it's just Jewish. It's the Jewish controlled conspiracy, um,
Yeah.
and that's their propaganda shit. And George Soros actually funds fucking most of these films, and then you're now just you're from the right wing side. You know what I mean?
Sure.
All I'm saying is that most of the time, if we see it and we know that we see it, we're going to call it out.
Yeah.
Or all the time, we're going to call it out. Maybe sometimes we don't. It doesn't jump out at us because maybe it's subtle. The person who wants to see racism in everything will.
Mm-hmm.
The person who doesn't want to see racism in anything won't.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And the person who's realistic will understand that these stories are from the hands and minds of men and women who are fundamentally ignorant of certain aspects.
right.
Like, okay, so you could say, I remember I made this argument with the Rambo films where it was very xenophobic, and after I saw the last Rambo film, I realized how
Yeah,
after seeing uh, 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 Birth of a Nation, how xenophobic and propagandistic the film was. What were you about to say? I'm sorry.
and they also tend to take on the whatever is the boogeyman of that era.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it go, this is the Nazis because it's a constant
Mm-hmm. But
for this time period.
this is the
But
thing
at
about
certain points, it's like, okay, post 9/11, it's going to be that. It's going to be
Middle
Islam, or if they
Easterners, and
want
yeah,
to, or if they want to say, well, then they're going to put like, well, we're going to qualify it and we're going to say radical Islam or whatever.
yeah.
And however you do it, like you're going to find that or maybe it's going to be a metaphor, and it's going to be like, well, one of my friends, we talk about a lot of this stuff, and if it's going to be 300 and the way they show the Persians,
Yeah.
The way that they're depicted in that film, and they're monstrous, and they're, Mel Gibson at that consulting table. So
The danger for an audience, though, is
there.
to take cinema at face value without the understanding that you only have so much story that you're able to tell at any given moment. So, the story is it's a traditional protagonist versus antagonist. Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones being the protagonist, Kate Blanchett being the antagonist, but in a bigger scheme, Russian communism of the 1950s.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
now they're
Right.
they're going back into the history of the world and civilizations and cultures. So, in a 2 hour and 2 minute movie, do we have the time to really dig into South American culture? I'm not saying as an excuse. I'm
Of
talking about
course. Right.
a reasoning of is there the time available to really dig into the cultural nuance of Mayan, Incan, Aztec cultures, because it's all blended in this shit. Um, the country of Peru and what those people would have been. Um, is that, no, they're simply savages, and I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that
And
Spielberg has it both ways. He depicts them as savages, and then he has his Wounded Knee moment where the Russians come in and massacre the entire tribe. So you're walking through this. You're walking through this area that I guess it's the inside of a volcano with or a canyon or whatever, and you see these dead Indians lying on the ground, massacred through um, machine gun fire. You didn't get that impression? Was that just me reading that into that, or?
no, I mean you see a lot of stuff that where even if it's not him, like
Mm-hmm.
even the last one I talked about, it isn't Spielberg, but it just jumps out at you when you see that convertible in the parade, and right away you think of Kennedy, and you have this woman screaming,
Yeah.
and uh, there are moments, and it also depends on who you are watching it. Obviously, you're gonna apply things to the film,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna receive things from the film culturally, because they're gonna come through. Um, you're right. I think the idea of having it both ways. But at the same time, you're also right with the idea that this is even beyond savages. All of these things are just, you said it earlier. I think you said just something to hang these
Mm-hmm.
stunts on.
Yeah.
It's, it's, it's just a plot structure. It's just,
Hold on a minute.
um,
Uh, we had some technical difficulties for a minute. Go ahead. Plots to hang
it's
these
just,
things
it's
on.
a, yeah, all it is just, it's a reason for the movie. So that even like these cultures become part of the MacGuffin.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't matter if it could be, as that saying goes, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? You know what I mean? Like nothing.
Yeah.
It could be Aboriginal people of Australia. It could be the Maori of New Zealand. It can be um, Lakota in South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, you take your pick. They're all interchangeable. All it is
Mm-hmm.
just
There's something
villain,
standing in the way of
hero.
the hero's
Right.
journey. Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
And yeah, we don't have time to go into the details. At this point, culture, put it in quotation marks, they're characters, they're obstacles, they're plot points, um, and the only person who matters is Indiana Jones,
Yeah.
and his struggles, his story, it's at that point it's all in service of the culture of Indiana Jones. It's not in service of it's not even in service of so-called white culture, whatever that means. It's just in the service of Indiana Jones, with like props to American go get 'em fucking heroism,
Yeah.
and still this idea of like, all this, the CIA and the FBI kind of always seen as these kind of like shadowy kind of um, figures or whatever, but the good old American kind of spirit, that's what gets it.
Yeah.
Outside of bureaucracy, he does it his own way. He gets fired, but now he gets reinstated, and whether that's in that film, whichever fucking one it is, doesn't matter. The idea is, this is the culture of Indiana Jones. everything else be damned.
That's a fair enough assessment, I believe. Yeah. The thing about it is, that, that's the consistency of these films, is that they are in keeping with a very vague understanding of the cultures that they're depicting, and a focus on Indiana Jones, his nobility, and his fight against the dangers of Russian communists, Nazi Nazi Nazis, and Indian cults. It's a danger of those fighting for world domination, those fighting to subdue others. It's just a rank and file gag fest built on this idea of fighting world domination. It works for what it is. It's fun. It's a good time. This is the weakest of the five films, no doubt. But a lot of that has to do with, I feel, Spielberg not having the heart to do the film. It wasn't invested. It's funny that Leslie says this is like Indiana Jones cosplay, because it kind of is, except for Ford. I think Ford is fully in. I don't. That's the really crazy thing. Through all of these five films, I never get the sense that Harrison Ford is sleepwalking through it. I never get the sense that Harrison Ford is is simply collecting a check. I definitely get that impression during Return of the Jedi. But I don't see that here. And I think it's because of his love for the Indiana Jones character.
So would you say that this is, if you were to look at kind of like, if you look at his filmography, where this falls in his filmography,
Mm-hmm.
what do you
Crystal
think?
Skull or Indiana Jones?
Yeah, no, Crystal Skull specifically.
Yeah.
Is How do you make sense of it, or do you at all? Like, where does this? Is he trying to, like? Why would he make this film? Do you think? I want you to kind of like. Is he trying to make? Did he want to make Lincoln, or what is he
Oh,
trying to? Is he
Spielberg.
doing this? Is this Spielberg.
Spielberg.
Is he doing one for them, one for me? What's happening?
Spielberg has always been one for you, one for me, and I think he has. I think he has a great deal of. He has a sense of duty to the studio that has funded him for all these years. The studio that funded him, I think is Universal, but he made this for Paramount, and the last film was made for Disney in association with Paramount. That's why you didn't see that fade into the mountain that he always does. I think there is a sense of I owe them.
DreamWorks is mostly with Paramount, or it changes?
DreamWorks is its own thing, but has a distribution deal. See, all of these companies, DreamWorks, these smaller companies, and DreamWorks is I think Geffen, Spielberg, and who else? DeLuca?
I have no idea.
I can't remember. It's I know it's Geffen and I know it's Spielberg. They produce their films and then they distribute through probably Universal, because I think he's a Universal director. I'm pretty sure he's a Universal director. Paramount. He went through Paramount for Indiana Jones because that's nobody wanted it. Originally, nobody wanted Indiana Jones. He and Lucas shopped it everywhere, and they couldn't get a taker. That film came in remarkably low budget for what it was, and it became this juggernaut. I think the idea was there was too much money involved to walk away from it, and I'm just guessing.
Crystal Skull.
Yeah, Crystal Skull. because I think also the idea was to hand it off to Shia LaBeouf, and that shit went down in flames.
Yeah, we didn't even get into him.
Yeah, and you know what's weird? He's not as bad as I thought he was. He's not great in it, but he's not
Yeah, I
as
mean,
bad.
he's just
Yeah,
basically cosplaying fucking
yeah,
Marlon Brando from the Wild One.
and that's I think his in. I can. Are you there still?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna have to cut that out. Um, that's one of the biggest mistakes of the film, to introduce him like that. To introduce him on that bike, dressed as Brando in the Wild One, you can't get away from that. It's a horrible introduction. He looks
It's just,
stupid.
well, we're in the 50s now.
We're in the 50s now, but it's too.
Right.
You got to know that when you see it, it's like, oh, this looks stupid. Even if guys would have been trying to affect that Brando vibe, which they did.
Yeah, most notably James Dean.
Yeah, but it was just bad. When I saw it, him riding out of the smoke like that, it was trying to give grandeur to something that didn't exist yet. That he hadn't done anything to make you think he was a badass, and that's the problem. Because Shia LaBeouf doesn't remind you of somebody who can kick your ass. Harrison Ford looks like he can give and take. Sean Connery looks like he can give and take. Shia LaBeouf doesn't. And the idea of him being this tough guy greaser kid, it just didn't really work. And I think he was miscast. But I don't think I don't watching it again last night. It wasn't as bad as I remembered.
Mm.
What was as bad as I remembered was the jungle CGI
Yeah.
and that fucking swinging through the trees bullshit. Whoever thought that was a good idea.
Tarzan?
Yeah. And it's kind of crazy because now it gets into the world of, well, why is that crazy, and the other shit that you see in the movie, surviving a nuclear attack, or
Right.
all that shit is perfectly acceptable, but him swinging, because the swinging through the trees thing is too reminiscent of Tarzan, and it's goofy. It's just dumb.
Right, and then you have the Errol Flynn sword fighting thing, and yeah.
I didn't mind that.
Um,
I didn't mind the sword fighting, except that it
I
was
didn't
done.
either. It's just,
Yeah.
except what?
Except that the CGI was so bad that it was just it didn't it just you're never invested with danger. I think that's the biggest problem with this film, is that the danger isn't palpable in this film. There are a million different ways that tank scene in Last Crusade could have went wrong. There's a lot of shots in Temple of Doom, and especially Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, Terry Leonard could have been. He could have rolled under the tires at any minute. You never
Mhm.
get the sense of actual danger in this film, especially in that in that jungle chase scene. Although once you get to the hand to hand fight between Indiana Jones and the Russian soldier, it's a great fight. It's a really good fight.
Yeah, the
But
big guy of that movie.
yeah, but the rest of the movie just it's like, it's fun for what it is, but it's not great. It is good to see. It is good to see Karen Allen back, and you know,
Yeah, I
she's
mean, yeah, Leslie was like, that's one other thing that now is I'm bringing her into the fucking um, conversation again. Is she's like, this is the best thing. She's the best thing about the film. She's like, she's the only one I believe in this
yeah,
movie, and I'm like, I agree.
yeah.
Um,
So wait a minute. When you say that, does that mean that you think you watch it thinking that Harrison Ford is sleepwalking through it?
no, I just think that at that point, it again, what I said
Mm-hmm.
towards the beginning is that by the time you get to that, it just seems like an adaptation
Yeah.
of a ride, and the ride is better.
You're right.
Um,
Yeah.
because I think the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland is better than this movie. I honestly do.
I get it.
Um,
I believe you on that. I believe you. I believe you're honestly. You're not being cute about this shit. You honestly believe it.
I am,
I
I
respect that.
am being cute,
You are, but
but I'm being cute and honest, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And as a whole, for whatever reason, for why he made this particular one when he did, and in the grand scheme of Indiana Jones, the series, and in the grand scheme of his filmography, Spielberg's, and I want to get into that at some point, and ask, is he overrated, etc.
Well, we said that. I mean, I think the question came down to is.
But I think it's
My question was: is Spielberg great? Can
well, I
you be
think that
great and
deserves its own
overrated at
episode.
the same
Yeah,
time?
and we should explore that.
Yeah, we should.
And okay, but now, having said all that, the Indiana Jones, now we've done the thing,
Yeah.
is it. I see it as and this kind of goes with Scorsese's critique of comic books,
Yeah.
comic book films. It's entertainment, and it's and I don't necessarily agree with Scorsese, but I think that's an episode also that we should do.
Yeah.
Is this series is entertainment, and it's a ride,
Sure.
literally, but also as a series of films, it is a ride. Sometimes with racism, sometimes with action adventure, sometimes with comedy, sometimes with references to older films at Hollywood. All of it, it's a ride, and some of it is ugly, some of it is exhilarating. That's how I see it.
I agree with you. I don't disagree. I think you're absolutely right. But I also think it's a fun ride. And I think that it's impossible to. I think it's impossible for any artistic person to cover all of the bases. It's not an excuse. That's not.
Yeah.
That's not a. That's not a. That's not a get out of jail free pass, and that's not a pass to say, hey, go over there and be as offensive and insulting as you would like. No, but what it is
Just make it fun. Yeah.
yeah. But what it is saying though is, they're going to be it's impossible to fully explore every aspect of what a story contains. Something is going to have to be sacrificed. I get that. It would be interesting to see this story told in other cultures. It would be interesting to see, one of these Indian action films and how they handle that, or one of these Bollywood films, because it's a huge market. They do it
right,
in Hong
and then
Kong.
it's still gonna be affected because it's gonna be post-colonial.
Sure.
So how would that play into it also as a reaction to Hollywood? How would Bollywood react to Hollywood, but also how would just culturally as a post-colonial critique or statement, or just even if it just has no critique so-called at all, that is also a critique sometimes, or a reaction to. So yeah, it would be interesting.
I think it would be, and I'm thankful for what we have. I'm glad that it's here, and I'm glad that we were able to go through these films, these 5 films. I'm so happy that I was given an opportunity to go back to them and reflect on what I once thought versus what I feel now, and just say goodbye to a character that I've admired for many years. I admire the storytelling. I admire the character and the world that he lives in, and I love the opportunity to start asking even more questions. And now we have this moment of what is Spielberg, and we will be getting
Yeah.
into that. We will, because it's not something that you can ignore.
No.
Not if you're a serious fan of film.
Yeah, and you shouldn't.
You shouldn't. You shouldn't at all. So
Yeah.
that's our episode for the week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, for supporting. If you'd like to help us out a little bit, keep the lights on, keep us going. This is a labor of love, and we do it because there's a passion within us. It's in us, and it's got to come out, and we have to put it out every week. But if you want to throw a little cash our way, you want to help us out, you want to show your appreciation for what we do, you can do that by going to buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos and donate as much as you can, whatever you can. Everything is appreciated, everything is valued, and it all goes towards keeping tape in the machine, keeping the machine rolling, and just doing exactly what we have been doing for the last 7 years. We love it. We hope you do. And if you could show us a little bit of appreciation, generosity, we would love you even more. So thank you very much. We'll be back next week with more movies. Bye bye now.